sessions.
LBC, coming up tomorrow morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
It was the question that stumped Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron. Why not shoot down drones over Ukraine as we have for Israel?
If you want to avoid an escalation, the one thing you do need to avoid is NATO troops directly engaging Russian troops.
But how does his Ukrainian counterpart respond to that?
I have new questions to ask, and I'm looking forward to my upcoming meetings, including with Lord Cameron, to have an open discussion.
Don't miss my exclusive interview with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 7:30 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to the programme if you've just joined us. Now, Kemi Badenoch has hot-footed it over from the Commons, having voted on the smoking bill. Kemi, welcome. Just to introduce you, for those who don't know, Kemi is Equalities Minister as well as Secretary of State for Business. We're going to take calls on whatever you want to ask about, but I do want to talk quite a bit about the Cass report. I know you've got things to say on that. I've read your Sunday Times article. You certainly had quite a lot to say on it. But let's start off with the reason that you voted against your own government. I know it's a free vote, but it's quite something to do for a cabinet minister to vote against the party line on that, isn't it?
Well, a free vote is different from a party line, in my view, and I thought very long and hard about it. I would rather not have voted against, but I thought actually a free vote gives you an opportunity to step outside collective responsibility and explain some of your thinking. And I went through multiple iterations of which way to vote, because my father died of cancer, and we believe that it was a lung cancer that actually spread to his brain. So I think it's important that people understand that I'm not a supporter of smoking. I don't like it. I've never been a smoker, and I can see the damage that it does. I want to see that smoke-free generation. But how we draft legislation and the approach we take is just as important as the intentions. You know that phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It applies to so many areas of policy where we allow the thing we want to do to justify the means, but I don't think the end justifies the means. I think we need to think about the means as well. And the principle really that I was most against was equality under the law and treating adults differently. Creating a law which would mean that a 50-year-old could do something but a 49-year-old couldn't, and how that would be enforced, it didn't feel right to me. So I voted against it just on that principle mainly.
Did you come under pressure from the Prime Minister or the whips?
No, not at all. People did ask how I was voting, but I didn't really come under any pressure from the Prime Minister or the whips.
Well, you know how cynical political journalists are. They're all going to say this is the first shot in a Kemi Badenoch leadership battle. She's staking her ground on the right, for freedom, and they'll look back on this as the moment that you decided that you were going to go for it.
It's a shame that they will do that. I know that they will.
Obviously.
Thank you, Ian. I know that they will do that, but we need space for people to be able to have disagreements without it being put down to ulterior motives. Everything we do is looked through the prism of the worst possible intention. And I think that's one of the reasons why politicians feel they don't get a fair hearing, and many people decide not to do this job. Sometimes we have to take what people are saying at face value. And that argument goes both ways. It could work the other way if someone is plotting to have some kind of leadership bid. There are different groups of people that you might be trying to appeal to. I don't think that's I don't think it's a helpful way of analysing things. Even it's just the moments when I have the freedom to actually say what I think and I escape collective responsibility. I can't resist giving an exposition on how I think about things. But I also worry that equality under the law is a principle that is under threat. We are moving into a space where people don't think about everybody getting the same treatment. It's all about groups and what different groups need. And I've always spoken against identity politics. I think even before I became an MP, today I criticised a Labour tweet by my Equalities counterpart because it looks like tribalism to me, where we keep dividing people into groups. And I said earlier today that I grew up in a place that was all about tribalism, and it is awful. We need to think about what brings us together.
But in a sense, doesn't that go against your very role as Equalities Minister? Because obviously there are groups that you are responsible for.
So this is, I'm glad you said that. this is often a misconception of what the Equality Act says. The Equality Act protects characteristics, not groups. So you as a white man are as protected as I am as a black woman on the grounds of race and sex. It is not, the Equality Act doesn't say, well, here's what we're going to do for black people, here's what we're going to do for women. Yes, when you apply the law, it may be that certain groups are being discriminated against or being disadvantaged, and you need to look at how you can make sure that you stop that. But I tell people that the Equality Act is a shield, it's not a sword. And quite often I see criticisms of people who think I'm there to defend minority groups. I'm here to defend everybody, not any specific group.
Liz Truss said to me last week in the interview that we broadcast yesterday that she would like to see the Equalities Act abolished. What would you say to Liz Truss?
Well, she had a chance to do that, and she didn't. She didn't.
Well, because she was Equalities Minister as well, wasn't she?
Yes, she was my predecessor in this job when she was Foreign Secretary and Trade Secretary. But I don't think that that's the right thing to do. The Equality Act does so much. It is so misunderstood. And many people assume that if you scrap the Equality Act, then all the things they don't like will go away. But many of the things they don't like are not in the Equality Act. This is the battle I have with organisations like Stonewall, where they tell people this is what you need to do to comply with equality law, and it really isn't. And so people then become hostile to legislation which is not perfect, but which I think is good, and I think is important, and actually has been very important in protecting lots of areas under threat, like freedom of religion and belief. I think it's certainly up for review. It's about 15 years old now. We should look at it, but abolishing it is not something that I would push for.
Right, let's move on to some of the issues that you are responsible for. We started by saying you've been quite outspoken on the CAS report, which came out last week, looking at how transgender children are treated. Mm-hmm. And I thought the best way to get into this is to take a call. And we've got Hayley, who's a trans woman in St Albans, on the line. Hayley, sorry to keep you waiting for so long. What would you like to say?
It's been my pleasure, and yes, good evening to both of you. I'm a trans person. I'm not an ism, a thing or an object. What is ideology to you that keeps being mentioned? I'm being made to feel a great deal of fear, and I'm very scared in the UK at the moment. And the other bit that I would like to mention is, what is the future for me, as everything about me is female. My medical records, my driver's license, my passport, everything is female. And what protections are you going to be putting in place for people that have already transitioned? Because we are living in extreme fear, not from the general public, but generally from public organisations.
Thank you, Hayley. So this is a really good question. It allows me to explain a bit further about how the government sees this. And one of the things that is most frustrating is people misrepresenting government policy as being anti-trans. It absolutely is not. We want trans people to be able to live their lives freely.
But trans people think it is. That's the problem.
So it's important that I stress that we want trans people to live their lives freely, and it is where we believe that there are concerns around self-identification, for example, where anyone can pretend to be trans. There are many people who are exploiting the label trans to do things that have got nothing to do with those people who have a protected characteristic of gender reassignment or gender dysphoria. And that's one of the things that we have been looking at. How can we provide the protections for both trans people, but also many of those people who are impacted by those who choose to exploit the policy, in particular women, when it comes to single-sex spaces and so on. And Hayley, you ask about what the ideology we're talking about is. It is fundamentally, for me, having spoken to a lot of people, people who have detransitioned, who that wasn't what they needed. It was different treatment. Kira Bell being a classic example, and the ideology is one that tells young people that they are born in the wrong body before any proper analysis has taken place, and that tells them that who they are is a construct when physically that is not. We will, certainly in UK law, allow people to present as a different gender, but there are some things where where your sex does not change. So things like medical treatments, people who get notifications for cervical cancer and other things that are very much related to their biology. If you confuse sex and gender, a lot of people, for instance, don't get the right health recommendations for themselves. There's often confusion about what the terms mean. And when people put the labels and the theories around constructs, social constructs, etc., above what people need in reality, then we start to see problems. We see it, for example, with convicted men who then claim to be trans after their conviction and then asked to be put in women's prisons. And those people who run public organizations who allow that, I think, are following an ideology rather than looking at what the people are saying.
But those incidents are comparatively rare.
Yes, they are.
And similar, when you have the debate about women-only spaces, when you actually look into the incidents of bad things happening in those circumstances, there are actually very, very few of them. Do you not think that this whole debate is centred around the wrong thing and sort of people are sort of putting up straw men when they're actually not there?
No, I don't think so. And I don't think the fact that they are rare or, uncommon is a reason for us not to look at it at all. And this is where the protection of trans people is actually quite critical. It is because more and more people have started presenting as trans when they aren't in these situations, that they are creating that climate of people, being very uncomfortable, not understanding what it means to be trans. Quite often I ask people when they're talking about these issues what they think trans mean. And they say all sorts of things. Some people confuse it with sexual orientation, for example. Some people confuse it with being intersex. So one of the things that the government is trying to do is bring some light into this debate and take the heat out. But my biggest difficulty is that whenever I'm trying to have a conversation about this, trying to explain the thinking, I get attacked constantly as being a transphobe, being a bigot, being nasty, not caring about people. And it's when we see activists play the individual rather than the argument that I know that there are loads of problems. There are loads of problems in this space. And let's not forget that there are many people who have been subjected to violence, lots of intimidation and picketing of women's groups and so on. Those things do happen. They are not uncommon, I'm afraid. Trans people are very few. That's what we mean by uncommon. But the behaviour of a lot of people around this space is
But how often do you actually talk to trans people themselves? Because we in the media come under a lot of criticism whenever we're talking about trans people. There's never a trans person on a panel, for example. I mean, I try and make sure there is wherever possible, but many don't. And I think it's the same also for politicians are accused of pontificating on trans issues without actually meeting many trans people.
Yes, I know that people. Say that, but we should always remember that there aren't that many people who are trans. Even the census, which we had, the ONS is looking again because it was quite clear that a lot of people didn't understand the question. So this is something that we do as a department. We do speak to groups regularly. We get lots of correspondence. Yes, I have. I won't name the specific people, but I have some who fundamentally disagreed with me, and others who did agree with me. But my job as a Secretary of State is not just to go out and about meeting people. I've done that over the last 4 years. Now is the time, especially in the run-up to an election, to close out what our policies are. We have done so much stakeholder engagement. We have lots of surveys. I've gone through thousands of consultation responses, seen the summaries, looked at medical evidence. There is a lot that we have done, but this is not just about engagement with the trans community. It is also about engagement with lots of people in the wider LGBT community who don't like sexual orientation and gender identity being grouped together because they feel that they have different needs. It's also about speaking to clinicians. It's about parents. It's about women's groups. We engage across the board.
People who have similar views to you on these issues are called TERFs. Are you a TERF? Trans exclusionary radical feminist?
I don't know how radical I am, and I'm certainly not trans exclusionary, but I do believe in single sex spaces. TERF was a word that was made up to be pejorative, is made up to be derogatory. I think a lot of people have actually co-opted that word. But I'm a politician. I'm not neutral. I think a lot of people think I'm a civil servant and I'm there to be neutral. I am neutral as far as I believe that the law should apply equally to everybody, but how that law should apply, where policy should land, that is not a neutral issue. I'm a conservative. So obviously I'm going to be looking at things through a conservative lens.
Hayley, I hope you're still there. Let me come back to you for a second. Do you want to react to anything that Kemi's said?
Yeah, I think the main problem is, for my community, is there is no investment in treatment. So what Kemi was trying to say, in reality, wouldn't work. And my concern at the moment is the amount of suicides in my community. And there's very little empathy or kindness or consideration towards us. So that's how I feel about it all.
All right. I'm sorry that you feel that way, Hayley. And I think that we always need to try and make sure that we demonstrate the empathy that is required when dealing with these sensitive issues. I am well aware of the high rates of suicide within the trans community. Certainly, it is a comorbidity with many other issues. And getting the right level of medical treatment is important, but also making sure that the standard of care within those clinics is important as well. And one of the things that I was really concerned about in the CAS review was the refusal to release data by some of the clinics. I, as a minister, cannot ensure that you are getting the best standard of care and the right treatment if clinics are hiding what is happening and what is going on.
Which brings us on to the CAS report, because, I mean, that one of the most shocking things in that report, and we'll come on to this in a second, was I think 6 of the 7 NHS clinics that provide treatment for trans children refused to hand over data, which I think is just outrageous. But we'll come on to the CAS report in a minute and take some more of your questions. 0345 6060 973. And of course, Hayley mentioned there about the high number of trans people who do take their own lives. Well, if you want to talk to the Samaritans, they're available 24 hours a day on 116 123, or you can email jo at samaritans.org. It's 7:46.
LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
7:49, the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, is with us taking your calls. Before we come to another call or text question, the CAS report, you wrote quite a punchy article in the Sunday Times about it. it's caused quite a lot of controversy. Just explain...
The Cass report or my article?
Well, both, actually. But, I mean, the Cass report itself, that was quite punchy, I thought, and it didn't seek a middle way, which a lot of these reports often do. Why do you think it is such a landmark report?
Because of what had happened beforehand. Before the Cass report, this evidence was out there, but she's done a really good job of collating quite a lot of what is out there. Before the Cass report, there were many things which were taken as a given, which simply weren't the case. People assumed, for example, that there was a lot of evidence about the impact of puberty blockers. So a lot of policy has been made on the hoof without a strong evidence base. And having a respected pediatrician like Dr. Cass just basically showing just how many treatments and how many policies across the board in public institutions are based on really campaigning activity rather than medical evidence was quite extraordinary. And it was also, in my view, a landmark report because it was very independent. So I certainly didn't get involved in terms of the detail of what she was doing. I did ask for updates because I wanted to make sure that we were going along, understanding where it was likely to land and not creating policy that would be, completely out of kilter with what the report said. But the most interesting thing for me was how it showed that a lot of clinicians are actually very uncomfortable with this. And there is a smaller group of them who, and this is what I was referring to when I was speaking to Hayley earlier, who have not just clinical experience, but also an ideology around what they think is correct, which is the gender affirmation, the affirmation model first, and almost the only way of treating gender dysphoria, which is not the case. And I think what Dr. Cass did was really important in us building good policy based on evidence. That is how Conservatives carry out equalities policy.
But there is clear pushback among clinicians on this, isn't there? Well, and what can you do about that? I mean, for example, the clinicians who refuse to cooperate with the review, I mean, how can they possibly continue?
So I think, given what she said, I personally think that we need some kind of inquiry into how public institutions are creating policy and getting their evidence. I have seen it in the workplace in a different guise. There was an independent report on inclusion at work, which talked about how a lot of people go in selling policies and say, well, this is what the Equality Act says, or this is what you need to do around care on gender identity, and so on. That is actually just people's wishes rather than what the evidence says. And I think it is extraordinary that there would be such a serious review and some clinics or clinicians would not cooperate. That shows that people are taking, whether it is the law or policy, into their own hands. This is taxpayer-funded medical services. It should be the government and the leadership within the NHS, underpinned by government policy, that decides what services people get.
Right, let's take a text question from Andy in Balper in Derbyshire. I'm a trans woman and currently use women's facilities such as public toilets and changing rooms with no problem. Does Kemi want to ban trans women from women's toilets in public and the workplace? Doing so would make it impossible for me and thousands of other trans women. Sorry, I'm having to scroll up the screen. Which is not working very well at the moment because somebody else is trying to do the same thing. Anyway, you get the gist of it.
Yes, this is another very good question. What I think if we start from the primary objective of what we are trying to achieve, which is tightening up the language of what trans actually means, so that it is trans people who have legal certification who get to use services, rather than people who just say, I'm trans, I self-identify, and there's nothing you can do about it, who want to exploit single-sex spaces. And I always use the example of the sex offenders who went into women's prisons. That's something that absolutely should not be happening. You can't put rapists in women's prisons. But the the example that Andy's giving is something that we are trying to tackle. We know that there are tensions in this space. It very much is, in a lot of circumstances, you have to pick one side or the other. Women's refugees are an example. If you are a biological male, it is very difficult in certain circumstances. So some of the policies we've put out, like toilets regulation, where we are encouraging public buildings to have, unisex toilets, not gender neutral. A lot of people think these are the same thing. But
what's the difference?
A unisex toilet is like a disabled toilet. Anyone can use it, a man or a woman. You go in, but it's about privacy. A gender neutral toilet is one where you have urinals. You have, toilets. I saw an example of this, and actually everybody is, doing their business in a very, very mixed environment. There's no privacy, and women need more privacy than men for all sorts of reasons, periods, menopause, just all these random things that happen because our bodies are different. And actually men want privacy. No,
I don't want women in a loo that I go to.
So what we're trying to do is get the balance right. We're not trying to punish anyone, but we do need to have boundaries. And this debate is also about where is an appropriate place for the boundaries to be. But if you're pilloried every time you try and talk about boundaries, we're not going to get into a decent space. And that then starts to create a lot of the hostility, which I have started seeing, a lot of the hostility to even the word trans, people not wanting to understand. And I think it's very sad that certain activists say it's the government's fault, but it's actually those people who create an environment where no one can speak that actually create that backlash.
Well, talking free speech, Miles in Leicester is on the line. Hello, Miles.
Hi. You okay?
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm allowed to ask two questions. Firstly, is that, first of all, how can we profess to allow freedom of expression and religion, yet we want to suppress freedom of religion in schools?
You're talking about the Catherine Birbalsingh School, aren't you? The judgment came today, where the judge said effective, and we're going to be talking about this after 9 as well, where the judge said that the school was under no obligation to provide facilities for Muslim kids to pray, or indeed any kids to pray. And it was quite clear from the moment that the parents decided to send their children to that school that would be the case. It is an interesting one, though, isn't it, Kemi? Because, a lot of schools do allow children to pray in them. Now, this was obviously, I wouldn't say it's a unique case, but it's been picked up on mainly because Catherine Birbalsingh is the head teacher there. What's your view on that?
So I welcome the judgment, and I found this particular incident, I'm not speaking generally, but this particular incident quite fishy right from the get-go. And it was clear that a lot of the statements that the young person had written had not been written by her, but by, I would say professionals. And the background to a lot of my sentiments on the Michaela case is that the Michaela school is constantly attacked, constantly got at. And I think it's because it is a flagship school for the Conservative government's free school program. And Catherine Birbalsingh has done something really amazing, setting up a school in a heavily deprived part of London. I think almost all the children there are on free school meals, and they are delivering results that are better than some of the top private schools in the country. And people say these things can't be done, but they can be. So when we see the school having been attacked in a lot of areas and standing firm, then the freedom of religion being used as a reason to try and take down the school. I, as minister, am very concerned because there is a principle here which Michaela is trying to uphold, which is important. And it goes back to the point I was making earlier about equality under the law. They're not suppressing Muslim students. They are a secular school. They were very, very clear that in this school, this is what we do. And what is happening is that some pupils are trying to change the school. And I think that if you want a school that allows you to pray, then you should pick a school that allows you to pray, not go to a school that says this is not what we do and try and make it into something different. And the other thing that was interesting, and it was Catherine who told me this when this story first came out, was that there were Muslim students in the school who didn't want the religious element and felt compelled, bullied even, to doing what their peers were doing, because that's what, quote unquote, those bullies were saying, this is what a good Muslim does, why aren't you doing it? And she didn't want that in her school. So it wasn't just about protecting the school's secularity. It was also about protecting those pupils who wanted to express their freedom of religion in a different way from being compelled to do it in a particular way. And I think that's why the judgment is quite key.
Are you religious yourself?
No, not at all. I used to be a very long time ago, but I'm, I think, at best agnostic now.
I won't ask the next question then, because after 9 we're asking our listeners, what's the point of prayer? Right. But that's not a question that you can answer, so I won't ask it. Not, no. Now, Kemi's going to stay for another 15 minutes. We're going to delay the start of Cross Question until 8:15. No, don't apologise. So if you've got any other questions you'd like to put to Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister and Secretary of State for, now, what is it, business, industrial strategy and...
It's business and trade. So business,
business and trade.
Business, it was international trade, now. Really.
Right,
but business and trade, yes.
Right. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, MPs have backed government plans that will mean youngsters today will never be able to legally buy a cigarette. The bill includes a crackdown on youth vaping. Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch was just one of 67 MPs who voted against, but told LBC she is against smoking and wants to see a smoke-free generation.
But how we draft legislation and the approach we take is just as important. And the principle really that I was most against was equality under the law and treating adults differently. Creating a law which would mean that a 50-year-old could do something, but a 49-year-old couldn't.
Rishi Sunak's spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after Iran's missile attack on Saturday. The Prime Minister stressed that escalation would only deepen insecurity in the Middle East. A Muslim pupil's lost her legal appeal against a ban on prayer practices at her North London school. A judge has ruled that Michaela Community School's policy was lawful. And Birmingham Airport's reopened after a mid-air security alert forced a flight to turn back. It's after an undeclared item was found on board that turned out not to be a security risk. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed trading down 145 points at 78.20. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.17.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Cold and dry tonight in most places. Showers for Scotland and Wales, with lows tonight of 2 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
Now, normally at this time, I'd be introducing our cross-question panel. I'm going to tell you who's going to be on the panel, but they're not going to be joining me until 8:15. We have with us Henry Hill, the acting editor of Conservative Home, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, the broadcaster and historian, Angela Richardson, who I'm dubbing the new Lee Anderson of the Conservative Party. She's the new deputy chairman. And we also have with us Claire Hanna, the SDLP MP. So they're going to be with us after 8. If you want to put your questions through for them after 8:15, you can do so now. 0345 6060 973. But let's continue with your calls to Kemi Badenoch. Let's go to Ben in Nottingham. Hello, Ben. Oh, it's a WhatsApp question. Sorry, apologies. How do the Conservatives plan to reach out to Remainers? Or, by leaving the ECHR, are they determined to lose our votes forever?
Well, we haven't said we're leaving the ECHR.
There's a lot of hints being dropped, though, aren't there? I mean, let's face it.
A lot of people have raised the ECHR as a barrier to stopping the boats, which is a relatively new problem. It is not unique to the UK. I remember going to Italy after, I think, about 8,000 people arrived on the island of Lampedusa, and that island's population is about 5,000-6,000. So this is really a global issue. The US has it in a different guise. And we are looking at what the best solutions are. The Prime Minister has made Stop the Boats one of his 5 priorities. We have legislation going through Parliament on Rwanda. But the question that Ben is asking about, how do we plan to reach out to Remainers, it is about delivering on the economy. And I often get characterised as being, like an urgent Brexiteer, somebody who's, really, really into Brexit. I keep reminding people that I wasn't an MP when we voted to leave, and I actually didn't know what I was going to do on the on the day. Until I went to the polling booth, my husband and I agreed completely on everything, and he voted Remain. So it was really about risk appetite. And the only thing we can do is deliver. We picked a strategy and said, this is the strategy. We've got to deliver on that strategy. I think what will be a problem, especially for those people who voted Remain, is if the government doesn't follow through on the strategy, and then we're in the worst of both worlds. So certainly as Secretary for Business and Trade, I try as much as possible to show people what we are doing with the freedoms. I put out a report 4 years on what we've achieved on trade deals, what we've been able to do on manufacturing, because we've been out of EU rules, a lot of the things we're doing on regulation. But these things, the benefits are very disparate, but people remember what has changed. But it's a lot harder for them to quantify what is improving because it's spread out quite evenly. So certainly in order to reach out to Remainers, we've got to keep telling the good story on the economy. We're doing as well or better than our peers, despite having more shocks. And I think that is a testament to how well we've run the economy over the last 14 years. I'm not saying it's perfect.
Do you think leaving the ECHR should be a manifesto commitment?
I don't know. I've always said that we shouldn't take it off the table. But the important thing is to show people that there is a plan. I think for those people who have been very sceptical about what happened post leaving the EU, it was that the leaving was talked about rather than how we would leave. And then we ended up spending, 3 years going round and round in circles. I was in Parliament for that, when no one, when no one could work out what was the best way to leave. And if you're going to do something like leave the ECHR, and I haven't said that we are, it's just an idea that is floated more and more. We need to demonstrate exactly what it is we're trying to achieve and bring people with us.
You used an interesting phrase there about when you decided to vote for Brexit, literally as you were in the polling station. Risk appetite.
Yes.
Just expand on that, because does that mean you just fancied a bit of a risk and voting Brexit would have given you that little thrill?
No, not at all. What I mean, this is an old banking phrase. I used to work in compliance basically, and a lot of risk management. And risk appetite it's not about wanting risk, but how much risk you think you can tolerate. And having a spouse who had the exact same views, but thought, I don't think this is going to work out. I agree with everything, but can we handle it? And I thought, yes, we can handle it. I think we can. If any country can do it, it's the UK. Otherwise, no one can leave. And I think we've got the brains, we've got the resources, and so on. So that's what I mean by risk appetite.
Okay, Kevin in Bristol, I think, has got a call on this. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Yeah, my question is that as you, Kemi Badenoch, you voted for Brexit, how well you think the British economy is going, especially as we are the first economy in trade history to raise barriers with our major trading partners, and the trade deals done so far are really very small and don't have a small beard compared with the trade arrangement of the EU. Thank you.
So we haven't, certainly we didn't originally raise barriers. We actually didn't raise barriers. The EU did. And that was one of the risks I think that we were aware of, that there might be some retaliation for us leaving.
But you are about to impose barriers.
Yes, but the reason why, and this is one of the interesting things about how these things play out, the reason why is because we have a lot of stakeholders, farmers, for example, who want a level playing field, and this is where the tension between the free market and the protectionism comes in. That if you pick a free market, free trade strategy, you need to, again, risk appetite comes into it. You need to decide how far you are going to go. But what I would stress is that we do have the most comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU. No other country in the world has this. So the trade deals which we are doing are in addition to that, not instead of. And many people talk about the benefits being so small. You look at the figures for what's happened with trade with Australia since we signed the FTA. Far more than any of the models predicted. It is going gangbusters. We are now the fourth largest exporter in the world. On services exporters, we are doing brilliantly. I think we're the second largest
you are pushing up barriers
in the world. Yes, but other things have come down. So we've removed tariffs, for example. We've removed loads of tariffs, and the cost of living crisis has actually hidden quite a lot of what has been done. We've removed tariffs on lots of products, which became cheaper, but inflation has masked.
But if you're a delicatessen owner in Britain, Britain, I can't remember when this comes in, but it's imminent if it hasn't already happened, and you're importing cheeses from Italy, for example, you're going to be faced with a bill for every time you import them up to £145. Now, that cannot be absorbed by the importer, so it's going to have to be passed on to the consumer. Therefore, inflation goes up again.
So, in a manner of speaking, inflation, there are lots of different products that will have more of an impact on inflation than others. But, interest rates and so on, those are the things that will really, really have an impact. The owner of that delicatessen is also able to source cheaper products from all over the world in a way that they couldn't beforehand. So, for example, I remember when there was a tomato shortage in Western Europe. It wasn't a UK thing. I think some people thought that it was. Tomatoes from Morocco, easier to come into the UK than the rest of the EU. So we now have more options. And food security is about raising our own domestic baseline resilience, so protecting our farmers. Prime Minister is very keen to show that we are making sure the farmers in the UK flourish. But it's also about getting that plurality of supply from all over the world, not just Europe, because quite often when they have the same problems that we do. We want to be global Britain. We want to face the whole world, not just the EU.
How is it of a benefit to anyone in the UK if they want to send a book to somebody in France that is worth £25 and it's a gift, and then their friend in France is faced with a customs bill of €14? Now, that didn't happen before Brexit. How can you persuade that person that Brexit has been a good thing?
Well, so I'd say several things. One is that when we said we were leaving the EU, leaving the single market was always going to be part of that. Leaving the customs union, these were things that were put on the table. The government, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor put all these things out there, and people still voted to leave. So it's important to remember that people talk about it as if it was, David Cameron who pushed for this. It was not the Prime Minister at the time, subsequent Prime Ministers, yes, but it was the people of this country who did vote. Now, what is happening is that all the 27 EU countries are doing different things. This doesn't happen when you send a book to another EU country. This is France specifically. I've been on the receiving end of it. I went on holiday and forgot my swimsuits. These are my own personal products. And I had to
Is there a big revelation coming?
No, I did not swim.
Was there then?
No, I did not swim until they arrived. And I thought it was, it was just extraordinary how you fill in the form. So I'm not going to pretend that it has been plain sailing and all perfect. There have been barriers put up. I'm not here to say everything's peachy and there are no barriers. What I'm saying is that we've decided on a strategy. If we keep going back and forth, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to get through the pain. And one of the things that we're doing as government is unblocking those barriers one by one. We've removed loads of market access barriers. There's one that will be coming with Italy, for example. We're removing, things like VAT charges, working on taxation. But it is something that's going to take a while to feed through. Some of the things that people complained about right at the beginning we've dealt with, but it's a strategy we've got to stick to. It's not going back to square one with Labour, as you will hear many Conservatives say.
Right, let's go back to your equalities brief. Jeremy is in Charlesworth with the final question. Jeremy, what would you like to ask?
Thanks, Ian. Could I ask when the conversion therapy bill is going to be brought forward by you, Kemi? And will it apply UK-wide? The reason I ask that last bit is because I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and all the professional bodies have made the same point. We can't have professional standards in one part of the United Kingdom being different from other parts of the United Kingdom. So that's the reason I want to make sure that when it is brought in, it covers the UK.
And is this because the professional organisations you're talking about are concerned about the contents of the bill, or it's just about territorial extents? Are you worried that it's going to stop you from being able to practice and then having different rules in different places, or just general territorial extent?
Professional standards are not a devolved matter. We can't have, as it were, criteria for what psychiatrists can and can't do in one part of the country being different from in another part of the country, because, as you know from the Cass review, the kind of standards around treatment and services have to be consistent across the whole of the UK. So it's not a devolved matter. But the specific concern is that we don't want the conversion therapy bill to impinge upon the standards that we already have in place, where conversion therapy is simply not allowed with any of the regulated professions. So we want to make sure they are exempt from coverage by the conversion therapy bill.
And Jeremy, just in your statement, you've highlighted quite a lot of the issues that we have had with drafting this bill. You would have seen from the CAS review that the Scottish Government wants to do its own thing. I'm afraid devolution, even though people want to have uniform standards across the UK, devolution plays its part in creating a differential. It's one of the things that's it's a feature of it, not a bug. But the CAS review is going to have implications for what we do around, we call it conversion practices. We don't think these things are therapy. And it again highlights one of the challenges we have had, because the straightforward bit is on the L, G and B side of it. And the difficult bit is around the T, where we define fluidity and where conversion starts and stops.
You have had years to work this out. And the suspicion is that you're kicking this into the long grass so Labour can do it after the election.
No, that is absolutely not what we are doing. It is just genuinely very difficult. We have had a long time, but that is because a lot of people who made promises had not looked at the issue deeply and thought it was very straightforward. Some of the evidence which we had was about the old style conversion practices, most of which is illegal anyway. So it is how to make sure that we have a bill that gives space for clinicians to do the right thing.
What's the timetable now? I mean, are you going to bring in a bill? We are still within the next couple of months.
We are still working on the draft bill. I'm actively working on it. The CAS review has implications. I need to look again at what it is that we are doing.
But if you don't bring it in before the end of May, you can't get it through Parliament by the election.
It will be a problem. This is why we're moving as quickly as we can. There are a lot of people who don't want to see who don't want a bill. I have argued that this is something that we need to get out there. We need people to understand what it is.
You yourself want a bill because the suspicion is that you are the bloc.
No. I'm not the bloc. But I do think that different people have different visions of what a bill will look like. So I have my own conversion practices style bill. I've told people I think this is a bill that would need to address the Keira Bell issue as well. It can't just be the old style things. But a draft bill is still in the works. But how it comes out, how it lands, what the CAS review implications will be, that is TBC.
Okay, Kemi, thank you for joining us over the last 45 minutes. Good to see you. Hope to see you again very soon. Coming up in a moment, it will be Tuesday's Cross Question with a star panel who I'll introduce in just a moment. It's 17 minutes past 8.
LBC, coming up tomorrow morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
It was the question that stumped Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron. Why not shoot down drones over Ukraine as we have for Israel?
If you want to avoid an escalation, the one thing you do need to avoid is NATO troops directly engaging Russian troops.
But how does his Ukrainian counterpart respond to that?
I have new questions to ask, and I'm looking forward to my upcoming meetings, including with Lord Cameron, to have an open discussion.
Don't miss my exclusive interview with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.